The moon hung low over the Montana plains like a tarnished silver dollar, casting long shadows across the endless expanse of prairie grass. Ethan Calloway pulled his coat tighter against the October wind as he guided his horse along the northern boundary of his ranch. At 34, he'd grown accustomed to these solitary night rides, checking fence lines and watching for wolves that might threaten his cattle. The routine gave him purpose, kept his mind from wandering to memories better left buried. His ranch, modest by territorial standards, stretched across 2,000 acres of rolling grassland dotted with cottonwood groves. He'd built it himself over the past 5 years, board by board, post by post, after returning from the war with little more than a discharge paper and a hollow space where his heart used to be. The work had saved him, given his hands something to do besides shake with memories of cannon fire and the fever that took Sarah and little Emma while he was away fighting for a cause that seemed meaningless now. The night wind carried the distant lowing of cattle and the lonely cry of a coyote. Ethan's mare, Buttercup, picked her way carefully along the rutted trail, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. He'd nearly completed his circuit when something unusual caught his eye. A dark shape against the pale grass, too angular to be natural. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a wagon, tilted at an odd angle like a ship run aground. One wheel had come clean off, leaving the wagon bed resting on the earth. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. Broken wagons on lonely roads often meant trouble bandits, claim jumpers, or worse. "Hello, the wagon," he called out, his voice carrying across the stillness. "Anyone there?" A figure emerged from behind the disabled vehicle, and Ethan's breath caught. It was a woman, alone, her dress torn at the hem and her dark hair escaping from what had once been a proper bun. She held a wrench in one hand like a weapon, her knuckles white with tension. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice trembled. "I'm armed." Ethan raised both hands slowly, showing his peaceful intent. "Ma'am, I'm Ethan Calloway. This is my land you're on. I mean you no harm." He studied her in the moonlight. Despite the dishevelment, she carried herself with a dignity that spoke of education and breeding. Her dress, though dusty and torn, was made of good fabric store-bought, not homespun. The woman lowered the wrench slightly, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. I apologize for trespassing. Mr. Calloway, my wheel broke, and I've been trying to—" She gestured helplessly at the wagon. "I'm not very skilled with repairs. I'm afraid." "Few folks are, especially in the dark." Ethan dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, then nodded. As he approached, he noticed her bags piled haphazardly in the wagon bed, as if packed in haste. A guitar case caught his eye, along with books and what appeared to be a small painting wrapped in oilcloth, not the possessions of a typical homesteader's wife. "Traveling alone?" he asked, kneeling beside the broken wheel. "Yes." The single word carried finality, a door closing on further questions. Ethan examined the damage. The wheel had hit a deep rut, and the impact had sheared the hub clean through. It would need more than a quick fix. "This'll take some doing. You'll need a new hub, maybe a whole new wheel. Town's a day's ride east." "I see." Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor beneath. "Then I suppose I'll make camp here tonight. Ma'am, with respect, that's not safe. Wolves, weather, and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Other dangers. My ranch house is just over that rise. You're welcome to shelter there tonight. In the morning, I can help you proper with this wheel." She stiffened. "I couldn't impose. Besides, I don't—" "That is, it wouldn't be proper. More proper than freezing to death or worse." Ethan stood, brushing dust from his knees. "I've got a separate bunkhouse where the hands stay during roundup. It's empty now. You'd have privacy." The woman studied him for a long moment. In the moonlight, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. Her eyes, dark in the silver light, held a wariness that spoke of hard-learned lessons. "Why would you help a stranger?" It was a fair question. Ethan considered his answer. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me to never turn away someone in need. And because—" He hesitated, then spoke a truth he rarely admitted. "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid in the dark." Something in her expression softened. "Clara," she said quietly. "Clara Bennett. Pleased to meet you, Miss Bennett. Now, let's see about getting your necessaries loaded onto my horse. We'll come back for the wagon in daylight." They worked together to transfer her most essential bags. As Clara handed him her valise, their hands touched briefly. The contact was like a spark jumping between two wires, unexpected. "Electric!" Clara jerked back as if burned, nearly dropping the bag. "I'm sorry, "No need to apologize," Ethan said gently, though his own hand tingled where her fingers had brushed his. How long had it been since he'd felt another's touch beyond a handshake at the general store? "Here, let me help you up behind the saddle. Buttercup's gentle as a lamb." Clara accepted his assistance, her hand small and calloused in his as he helped her mount. Those weren't the hands of a pampered lady. Despite her educated speech and fine clothes, there was a story here, one written in contradictions. The ride to the ranch was silent, save for the creak of leather and the whisper of grass beneath Buttercup's hooves. Clara sat rigidly behind the saddle, careful to maintain distance between them, though the motion of the horse occasionally brought her forward against his back. Each accidental contact sent an uncomfortable awareness through him, the warmth of another human being. The scent of lavender water mixed with trail dust. The ranch buildings appeared like shadows against shadows until they drew close enough to make out details. The main house, 2 stories of solid log construction with a wide porch, stood like a sentinel watching over the smaller structure's barn, smokehouse, bunkhouse, and various sheds. It wasn't grand, but it was sturdy and well-maintained, built to withstand Montana winters and summer storms alike. "It's lovely," Clara said softly, the first words she'd spoken since they'd left her wagon. "It's home." Ethan dismounted and reached up to help her down. Again, that electric moment of contact, her weight briefly in his arms as she found her footing. "The bunkhouse is there. I'll get a fire started. Bring you some water for washing and a hot meal." "You needn't go to such trouble." "It's no trouble." He gathered her bags, noting how she kept the guitar case close. "Do you play?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "A little. It was my father's." "Was?" The past tense hung between them like a gate neither chose to open. The bunkhouse was sparse but clean, 4 narrow beds with straw mattresses, a pot-bellied stove, a rough table and chairs. Ethan busied himself starting a fire while Clara stood uncertainly in the doorway. "There's a lock on the inside," he said without looking up. "And I'll be in the main house if you need anything. Just holler." "Mr. Calloway." Her voice stopped him as he moved to leave. "Thank you. I haven't met much kindness on the road." He turned to face her, seeing for the first time in the lamplight the full extent of her beauty, not the porcelain perfection of a china doll, but something more real and infinitely more compelling. Dark eyes that held depths of sorrow, high cheekbones that spoke of strength, lips that might smile easily in better times. "World's hard enough without folks making it harder for each other," he said simply. "I'll bring that food directly." In his kitchen, Ethan found himself taking more care than usual with the simple meal, warming the stew properly, cutting fresh bread instead of serving yesterday's, even adding a dollop of preserved peaches to a plate. He stopped, shaking his head at his own foolishness. She was a traveler. Nothing more. Tomorrow or the next day, she'd be gone, and he'd return to his solitude. When he knocked on the bunkhouse door, she answered quickly, as if she'd been waiting. "Oh, this is too much," she protested, Seeing the loaded tray, "You look like you haven't eaten proper in days. No offense meant." "None taken. You're very observant." She accepted the tray with grateful hands. "Won't you sit a moment? It seems wrong to eat alone when you've been so generous." He should have declined, should have maintained the proper distance. Instead, he found himself pulling out a chair, watching as she ate with a hunger she tried to disguise with careful manners. "You mentioned this was your land," she said between bites. "Have you been here long?" 5 years, built it up from nothing after the war. "You served 3 years with the 7th Kansas Cavalry." The words came out flat, discouraging further inquiry. Clara seemed to understand. She changed the subject. It must be satisfying, creating something from wilderness. "It has its moments. Hard work, but honest. The land doesn't lie to you or play games. You treat it fair. It treats you fair back. That must be refreshing." There was something in her tone that made him look at her more closely. In the lamplight, he noticed a fading bruise on her wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve. "Miss Bennett, I don't mean to pry, but are you in some kind of trouble?" Her hand stilled, fork halfway to her mouth. "What makes you ask that?" Woman traveling alone, at night, with hastily packed bags and a broken wagon on a little-used road. Either you're running to something or from something, and folks running to things usually travel by daylight. Clara set down her fork carefully. "You're very observant, Mr. Calloway." She echoed her earlier words, but this time they carried weight. "Let's just say I'm seeking a fresh start. Surely you can understand that." He could. God help him. He could. "Well, you're safe here tonight. That's what matters." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You're a good man, Ethan Calloway. Just a man trying to do right." He stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through his chest. "I'll leave you to your rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. Mr. Calloway Ethan." His name on her lips stopped him at the door. "Thank you for everything." He touched the brim of his hat and escaped into the night, troubled by feelings he'd thought buried with Sarah, back in his own house. He sat by the dying fire, unable to shake the memory of Clara Bennett's dark eyes and the way his name sounded when she spoke it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and moaning through the eaves. Change was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the restlessness of the cattle, in the ache of old wounds, but mostly, he felt it in the way his carefully ordered world had tilted the moment Clara Bennett's hand touched his. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of lavender water and moonlight, of a woman with secrets and sadness who'd appeared like a ghost on his land. Tomorrow, he'd help fix her wagon, and she'd continue on her way. That was how it should be, how it had to be. But as the wind howled around his lonely house, Ethan Calloway allowed himself to hope, just for a moment, that tomorrow might not come so soon. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Ethan was already awake, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn himself 5 years ago. Sleep had been elusive, chased away by thoughts of the woman in his bunkhouse. He rose, splashed cold water on his face, and set about his morning routine with determined normalcy. By the time the sun painted the eastern horizon pink and gold, he had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in the pan. Through the kitchen window, he saw smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, so she was awake too. He knocked on the bunkhouse door with a plate of breakfast. Clara answered, fully dressed but looking worn despite the night's rest. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, setting the plate on the table. "Some," she admitted, though they both knew it was generous. "The wind kept me company." "Montana wind takes getting used to. Sounds like the world's ending some nights." She smiled faintly. "I've heard worse sounds than wind, Mr. Calloway." There it was again, that hint of something dark beneath her composed exterior. Ethan wanted to ask, but the wariness in her eyes stopped him. "I'll head out to fetch your wagon after breakfast," he said instead. "Should have you back on the road by afternoon." "Actually—" Clara hesitated, fingers worrying the edge of her sleeve. "I was wondering if perhaps, that is, if you might know of any work in the area. I find myself in need of employment." Ethan studied her carefully. "Thought you were just passing through." "Plans change." She met his gaze steadily, though he noticed her hands trembled slightly. "I'm willing to work hard. I can cook, clean, tend gardens. I've even helped with calving, though it's been some years." Calving? He couldn't hide his surprise. "Where'd a lady like you learn about calving?" A shadow crossed her face. "My circumstances haven't always been what they appear, Mr. Calloway." He considered her request. Having help around the ranch would be useful. He'd been managing alone since his last hired hand left for the goldfields 2 months ago. But having a woman here, especially this woman who made him feel things better, left buried. "I couldn't pay much," he heard himself saying. "Room, board, and a small wage. Works hard. Hours are long." Hope flickered in her eyes. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "What about your wagon, your journey?" "Can wait." The words came out firm. Final. "If you'll have me, Mr. Calloway. I'd be grateful for the position." Against his better judgment, Ethan nodded. "Trial basis. See how it goes." Relief washed over Clara's features. "Thank you. You won't regret this." He already did, but kept that thought to himself. They retrieved the wagon together, Ethan bringing tools and a spare wheel from his workshop. In daylight, he could see more clearly the signs of hasty departure scratches on the wagon bed, as if heavy items had been dragged out quickly. A broken strap that looked deliberately cut. "This yours?" he asked, holding up a leather-bound book that had fallen beneath the seat. Clara reached for it quickly, too quickly. "Yes, thank you." He glimpsed elegant handwriting before she tucked it away. Poetry, maybe, or a journal. Another piece of the puzzle that was Clara Bennett. Back at the ranch, Ethan showed her around properly. The main house had 6 rooms, kitchen, parlor, his bedroom, a study that doubled as an office, and 2 unused bedrooms upstairs that had been meant for children who never came. "You can have one of the upstairs rooms," he said, not looking at her. "More proper than the bunkhouse if you're staying on." "I couldn't—" "It's that or continue in the bunkhouse. Your choice. But the house is warmer come winter." She chose the smaller of the 2 rooms, the one that faced east toward the sunrise. They moved her few possessions in silence, both acutely aware of the impropriety of the arrangement, both choosing to ignore it. That afternoon, Clara proved her worth. She attacked the neglected kitchen with fierce determination, scrubbing years of bachelor grime from surfaces Ethan had given up on. She organized the pantry, took inventory of supplies, and by evening had produced a meal that made him realize how poorly he'd been feeding himself. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he asked, savoring beef stew that actually tasted like something beyond boiled meat and vegetables. "My mother insisted all her children learn practical skills," Clara said carefully. "She said you never knew when life might require you to fend for yourself." Wise woman. She was, again that past tense that closed doors. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Clara had found an old shawl in a trunk and wrapped it around her shoulders against the evening chill. The domesticity of it all made Ethan's chest tight. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said. "How does one man manage all this alone?" Grateful for safe ground, Ethan explained the rhythms of ranch life, moving cattle between pastures, mending fences, branding, calving season, the constant battle against weather and predators. Clara listened intently, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood more about agricultural life than he'd expected. "You've done all this yourself for 5 years?" "Had help on and off. Hard to keep men when the goldfields keep calling them away. Don't you get lonely? The question hung between them like a living thing. Ethan stared out at the darkening plains. Man gets used to his own company. That's not what I asked. He glanced at her, finding her watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. Yes, he admitted quietly. Sometimes the silence gets so loud it hurts. Clara nodded as if she understood perfectly. Solitude by choice is freedom. Solitude by circumstance is a prison. Speaking from experience, she pulled the shawl tighter. Perhaps we both are. That night, Ethan lay awake again, but this time it wasn't entirely due to racing thoughts. Around midnight, he heard footsteps above Clara pacing her room. Then, muffled by distance and floorboards, the sound of crying. He rose, made it halfway up the stairs before stopping. What could he offer? What right did he have? He retreated to his room but couldn't shut out the sound of her distress. Finally, he did the only thing he could think of. He made tea, left it outside her door with a gentle knock, and returned downstairs without a word. The crying stopped shortly after. He heard her door open, the soft clink of china. A few minutes later, light footsteps on the stairs. "Mr. Calloway!" Her voice was rough from tears. "Ethan!" He emerged from his room to find her at the bottom of the stairs, cup in hand, eyes red but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the tea, for not asking. We all have our ghosts. Miss Bennet." "Clara," she corrected softly. "If I'm to stay, you should call me Clara." Clara. The name felt right on his tongue. "You should try to rest. Morning comes early." She nodded, but didn't move. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." His pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "You don't owe me explanations." "Perhaps not, but you've shown me kindness. That deserves some truth." She set the teacup on the hall table, fingers tracing its rim. "I am running from someone, but I swear to you, I've done nothing wrong beyond wanting to live my own life." "That's enough for me." She looked up, surprise clear on her face. "You won't ask questions." "Would asking change anything? You're here now, willing to work. Rest is your business until you choose to make it mine." Something shifted in her expression walls, lowering just a fraction. "I believe I understand why you live alone out here. Ethan Calloway, it's safer, isn't it, when you can't be hurt by what you don't let close?" The truth of her words cut deep. "Go to bed, Clara. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you about cattle." She smiled sadly and turned to go, then paused. "The tea helped. My mother used to make chamomile when I couldn't sleep. How did you know?" "Lucky guess." He didn't tell her about the nights Sarah had paced their bedroom, heavy with child, and how chamomile was the only thing that soothed her restlessness. Some ghosts were his alone to carry. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Clara proved herself capable and uncomplaining, whether mucking stalls or helping drive cattle to fresh pasture. She had a natural way with animals, especially the horses, who seemed to sense her gentle nature. But there were moments that betrayed her origins, the way she held a teacup, her perfect posture even when exhausted, the educated turn of her phrases, and sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he'd catch her staring at the horizon with such longing it made his chest ache. One evening, a week into her stay, Ethan found her in the barn with her guitar. She stopped playing when he entered, but not before he heard a few bars of something beautiful and sad. "Don't stop on my account," he said. "Been a long time since there was music here." She hesitated, then positioned her fingers on the strings again. The melody that flowed forth was like nothing he'd heard in the rough saloons of Town Complex. Classical, speaking of concert halls and proper training. "You play beautifully," he said when she finished. "My father taught me. He said music was the only thing they couldn't take away from you." She ran her fingers over the guitar's worn surface. "He was wrong about that, but I saved this at least." "Who's they?" "Clara." She looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she might answer. Then she shook her head. Not yet, maybe not ever. Can that be enough? He wanted to say no, wanted to demand answers, to understand what had driven her to his door. But the fear in her eyes stopped him. For now, he said quietly. But Clara, if trouble's following you, I need to know, not for me, but for the ranch. I've worked too hard building this place to lose it. I understand. She stood, cradling the guitar. When that time comes, I'll leave. I won't bring harm to you or your home. You have my word. Her word. Ethan wondered what that was worth from a woman with secrets. But looking at her proud despite her circumstances, strong despite her fear, he found himself believing her. That night, the wind brought the smell of snow from the mountains. Winter was coming, and with it, the forced intimacy of long nights and short days. Ethan knew he should send her away, find her safe passage to wherever she was going. Instead, he added extra wood to her room's fireplace and made a mental note to check the chinking between the logs before the first storm. Whatever Clara Bennett was running from, she'd found sanctuary here, at least for now. And if he was honest with himself, in bringing life back to his too-quiet house, she'd given him sanctuary too. The first snow came earlier than expected, dusting the ranch with a thin layer of white that melted by noon. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes fall, her expression distant and troubled. Ethan had learned to recognize these moments when something triggered memories she kept locked away. "Snow troubles you?" he asked, bringing in an armload of firewood. She startled, then forced a smile. "It's beautiful. I'd forgotten how beautiful winter could be." "But—" Clara turned from the window. "Snow makes it hard to run." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, and though she'd proven herself invaluable around the ranch, the mystery of her past remained intact. Until now. That evening, as they shared supper, Clara set down her fork with deliberate care. "You deserve to know the truth." Ethan waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. "My full name is Clara Bennett Harland." She spoke the last name like it tasted bitter. "My uncle is Jacob Harland." The name hit Ethan like cold water. Everyone in 3 counties knew of Jacob Harland, cattle baron, territorial power broker, a man who collected judges and sheriffs like some men collected stamps. "You're kin to Jacob Harland." "My father was his younger brother, a dreamer. Uncle called him weak." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "Father believed in music, art, education. He married my mother for love, not connections. Uncle never forgave him for that." "Where are your parents now?" "Dead. Fever took them 3 winters ago. Uncle became my guardian." She laughed bitterly. "Guardian, jailer is more accurate." Ethan poured coffee, giving her time. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the wall. And outside, wind rattled the windows. "Uncle had plans for me," Clara continued. "Marriage to strengthen his business empire. Wallace Thornton, perhaps you know the name." Ethan did. Thornton owned the largest bank in the territory, a man in his 50s with a reputation for foreclosing on struggling homesteaders. "I refused. Uncle insisted. When I continued to refuse, he had me declared mentally unfit, said my grief had affected my mind, that I needed supervision for my own good." Her voice grew hard. "He kept me at his estate outside Billings. Guards, locked doors, barred windows. A pretty prison, but a prison nonetheless." "How long?" 14 months. The words came out flat, emotionless. 14 months of being told I was ill, unstable, that my desire for freedom was a symptom of female hysteria. They brought doctors who prescribed laudanum, rest cures, isolation. I learned to pretend compliance while planning escape. Ethan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. The thought of Clara caged, diminished, made something dark and violent stir in his chest. There was a stable hand, Clara continued. Thomas, kind, decent. He saw through their lies, helped smuggle books to me, kept my mind sharp. We became close, her voice caught. Too close, Uncle found out. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. Thomas challenged Uncle's treatment of me, said he'd go to the territorial governor, expose the false imprisonment. Uncle had him arrested for theft-planted evidence. Of course, the trial was a farce. Thomas was convicted, sentenced to hard labor. What happened to him? Dead within 6 months, mining accident, they said. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Murder, more likely. Uncle's reach extends far. Ethan rose, instinct driving him to comfort, but Clara held up a hand. Let me finish. After Thomas died, I knew I had to escape or die trying. I spent months preparing, saved what little money I could hide, learned the guard routines. 6 weeks ago, during a storm that drew everyone inside, I ran, stole a horse, then traded it for the wagon to avoid being tracked. I've been moving ever since, never staying anywhere long. Until here. Why here? Why stay? Clara turned to face him, and the raw honesty in her eyes took his breath. Because for the first time in 2 years, I felt safe. Because you looked at me and saw a person, not property or a problem to solve. Because... She hesitated, then plunged ahead. Because when you helped me that night, when our hands touched, I felt alive again. The confession hung between them, dangerous and sweet. Ethan crossed to her, maintaining careful distance. Clara, if your uncle finds you here, he'll destroy you. Her voice was steady now, resolved. That's why I should leave. Why I will leave, if you ask it. But Ethan, I'm so tired of running, so tired of being afraid. You think I'd turn you out knowing what you've told me? You'd be wise to... Never been accused of too much wisdom. He studied her face, seeing new meaning in every guarded expression he'd witnessed. You're not his property. Clara, not anybody's. You want to stay. You stay. He'll come, eventually. He'll find me. Let him come. The words surprised them both with their vehemence. This is my land, my home. I fought a war for the principle that no man owns another. I won't stand by while someone tries to cage you again. Clara's composure finally broke. She pressed her face into her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long suppressed. This time, when Ethan reached for her, she didn't pull away. She collapsed against him, and he held her while she cried out months of fear and grief and anger. When the storm passed, she pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't... Nothing to apologize for. He handed her his handkerchief. Question is, what do we do now? We. You work for me. That makes your problems my problems. That's how it works out here. A smile ghosted across her face. You're a rare man, Ethan Calloway. Just stubborn. Ask anyone in town. He grew serious. We need to be smart about this. Your uncle will have men looking, rewards posted. You can't go to town, can't be seen by strangers, and we should teach you to shoot. I know how to shoot. That surprised him. Do you now? Father taught me, said a woman should know how to defend herself. Uncle took my pistol when he locked me away. But I remember. Another piece of the puzzle that was Clara, refined lady, competent ranch hand, prisoner, survivor. Ethan fetched his spare Colt from the cabinet. Show me! They went outside despite the late hour. Ethan set up targets' old cans on fence posts and watched Clara handle the weapon. Her form was good, her aim better. You'll do, he said after she put 3 shots in a tight group. Keep this with you from now on. I couldn't. Not asking. He pressed the gun into her hands. A woman alone needs protection. A woman with enemies needs it more. Back inside, Clara made tea while Ethan banked the fires for the night. The domestic routine felt different now, charged with the weight of shared secrets. "I should write to a lawyer friend in Denver." Ethan said, "See what legal remedies might exist. Your uncle can't just declare you unfit without cause. He has judges in his pocket, witnesses who'll swear to whatever he pays them to say. And I did run away. Steal a horse. He'll use that against me." "We'll see. Meanwhile, you're safe here." He paused at the stairs. "Clara, what you said earlier, about when we met." She looked up at him, vulnerable but unashamed. Was it wrong to say, "No, just complicated"? "Everything's complicated," she said softly. "But some things are also simple. Good night, Ethan." He climbed the stairs slowly, mind churning. In his room, he sat on the bed and picked up the photograph on his nightstand, Sarah in her wedding dress, smiling with promise of all the years they'd never have. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I didn't mean for this to happen." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Something in him had recognized Clara from that first moment, had responded to her in ways that went beyond mere kindness to a stranger. He'd been sleeping for 5 years, going through motions of living without truly being alive. Clara had awakened him, and that terrified him as much as any threat from Jacob Harland. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, covering the ranch in pristine white, but Ethan knew that beneath that clean surface, the ground remained unchanged hard, complicated, full of stones and roots and hidden dangers. Come morning, he'd start preparing for whatever storm Jacob Harland might bring. But tonight, he allowed himself one moment of peace, knowing Clara was safe under his roof, knowing that whatever came next, neither of them would face it alone. The wind howled around the eaves, but the house stood strong, a shelter against more than just weather. And in her room, Clara opened her journal for the first time in weeks, writing by candlelight. "I told him everything tonight. He didn't turn away. I think I'm beginning to understand what home means, not a place, but a choice to stop running, to stand and fight beside someone who sees you truly. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, but tonight, I am not alone. Tonight, that is enough." The November days grew shorter, and with them, the boundaries between Ethan and Clara grew thinner. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, falling into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Clara learned to read the weather in cloud formations, to sense when the cattle were restless, to mend harnesses with fingers that had once only known piano keys and needlework. "You're getting calluses," Ethan observed one evening, watching her wrap the reins around her hands as they brought the horses in. "Good," Clara replied firmly. "Soft hands are weak hands. I'm done being weak." But she wasn't weak, that much had become clear. She was learning to ride with a natural grace that surprised them both, taking to the work like someone remembering rather than learning. When Ethan mentioned this, she grew thoughtful. Before Mother married Father, she lived on a small farm in Ohio. She used to tell me stories about mucking stalls and birthing calves. I thought they were fairy tales. Clara smiled sadly. Perhaps something in the blood remembers. They were mending fences on the south pasture when the subject of education arose. Clara had noticed Ethan's small library and the ledgers he kept in careful script. "You're well read for a rancher," she said, holding fence posts steady while he hammered. "My mother was a school teacher before she married, insisted her boys learn proper, war or no war." He drove another nail home. "What about you? You mentioned your father believed in education." "Private tutors until I was 16, then a year at Mount Holyoke Seminary back east." Her voice carried a mix of pride and sadness. Uncle called it a waste, filling a woman's head with useless knowledge. He only allowed it because Father was still alive then. "What did you study?" "Literature, mathematics, natural philosophy, French." She laughed. "I can recite Shakespearean sonnets and calculate compound interest, but I couldn't keep myself free. Ironic, isn't it? Knowledge is never wasted, just sometimes takes a while to find its use. That evening, Clara discovered his struggle with the account books. The numbers swam before his tired eyes, and his frustration showed. "May I?" she asked gently. Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. "If you've a mind to help." She settled beside him at the kitchen table, their shoulders nearly touching as she reviewed his figures. Within minutes, she'd found 3 errors in his calculations and showed him a simpler method for tracking expenses. "Where'd you learn bookkeeping?" "Father taught me. Said a woman should understand money, especially if she ever hoped to control her own." Her pen moved smoothly across the page, creating neat columns. "He was preparing me for independence. Uncle saw it as rebellion." They worked until the lamp burned low, Clara teaching him shortcuts and systems that made the numbers manageable. The intimacy of it, heads bent together over the ledger. Her breath warm on his cheek when she leaned close to point something out stirred feelings he'd been trying to suppress. "Thank you," he said when they finished. "Been putting this off for weeks." "Partners help each other," Clara said simply, then blushed at the word choice. I know what you mean." But the word hung between them, full of possibility. The next morning brought the first real storm of winter. Snow fell thick and fast, transforming the landscape into an alien world of white. They worked frantically to bring the cattle closer to shelter, riding through wind that cut like knives. Clara proved her mettle that day. When a young steer got separated from the herd, she went after it without hesitation, guiding her horse through drifts with surprising skill. Ethan lost sight of her in the swirling snow and felt panic claw at his throat, a fear sharper than any he'd known since Sarah. When she emerged from the white veil, driving the steer before her, he felt relief so profound it left him shaking. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he shouted over the wind. "I'm fine," she called back, but he saw her smile at his concern. They barely made it back before the storm became a full blizzard. In the barn, they worked together, rubbing down the horses, breath clouding in the cold air. Clara's cheeks were bright red, her eyes sparkling with exhilaration. "That was incredible," she said, pulling ice from her horse's mane. "Terrifying, but incredible. Most folks don't find blizzards incredible." "I'm not most folks." She turned to face him. "I spent so long in rooms with locked doors. Ethan, even a storm feels like freedom when you're facing it by choice." Something in her words broke through his last defenses. Before he could think better of it, he crossed to her, cupping her cold face in his hands. "Clara." "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons why not, but Ethan, I'm so tired of living by other people's reasons." He kissed her then, there in the barn with snow howling outside and horses stamping in their stalls. She tasted of winter and possibility, of second chances and dangerous hope. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. "This complicates things," he said roughly. "Everything's already complicated." She touched his face with fingers still cold from the storm. "This, at least, is a complication I choose." They were trapped by the blizzard for 3 days. 3 days of close quarters, of careful distances that fooled neither of them. They played cards by firelight, Clara teaching him whist while he showed her poker. She played her guitar in the evenings, filling the house with music for the first time in years. Sometimes Ethan would catch her watching him with an expression that made his chest tight. On the second night, the nightmares came for her. Ethan woke to the sound of Clara crying out in her sleep, words muffled but the terror clear. He climbed the stairs and knocked softly. "Clara, you're safe. It's just a dream." The crying stopped, replaced by ragged breathing. "Ethan." "May I come in?" A long pause. "Yes." She sat huddled in the bed, knees drawn up, looking younger than her years. "I'm sorry I woke you." "Don't apologize." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining proper distance. Want to talk about it? The same dream. Always the same. Locked doors that won't open. Thomas calling for help, but I can't reach him. Uncle's voice saying I'm sick, that this is for my own good. She shuddered. Sometimes I wake up and for a moment I think I'm still there. You're not. You're here. You're free. Am I? She looked at him with haunted eyes. Or have I just traded one cage for another hiding here? Afraid to be seen, afraid to live. This isn't a cage. Clara, you can leave any time you want. That's just it. I don't want to leave. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That terrifies me more than Uncle finding me. Ethan understood. The same terror lived in his chest, the fear of caring again, of loss that could destroy what remained of his carefully reconstructed life. Read to me, she asked suddenly. Mother used to read when I couldn't sleep. It helped. He fetched a book from downstairs, Emerson's Essays, well worn from years of solitary evenings, settling in the chair by her bed. He read by lamplight while snow tapped against the windows. Gradually, her breathing steadied, tension leaving her shoulders. Ethan, her voice was drowsy now. What happened to your wife? He'd known the question would come eventually. Cholera. Summer of '82. I was away, fighting in New Mexico. By the time word reached me and I got home, she and our daughter were already gone. Emma was only 2. I'm so sorry. Long time ago now. Time doesn't make loss smaller, just makes us bigger so we can carry it better. The wisdom of her words surprised him. He looked at her, this woman who'd known her own losses, and felt understanding pass between them. Get some sleep, he said gently. Morning comes early, storm or no storm. On the 3rd day, the blizzard broke. They emerged to a world transformed, pristine and glittering under weak winter sun. The work of digging out began, but there was a new ease between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be denied. That evening, as Clara served dinner, she set a small package beside his plate. What's this? Open it. Inside was a knitted scarf, dark blue wool worked in a simple pattern. When did you... The wool was in the mending basket. I worked on it during the storm. She looked suddenly uncertain. Is it foolish I wanted to give you something, to thank you for everything? Ethan ran his fingers over the soft wool, throat tight. How long since someone had made him something with their own hands, something that served no purpose but warmth and care. It's perfect, he said roughly. Thank you. She smiled, bright as summer. You'll need it. Winter's just beginning. Yes, he thought, watching her move about the kitchen with easy familiarity. Winter was beginning, but for the first time in 5 years. He didn't dread the long, dark months ahead. Clara had brought light to his house, warmth to his life, complications to his heart. Outside, the snow stretched endlessly, hiding the earth's scars beneath its clean surface. But spring would come eventually, and with it, the muddy truth of things. Jacob Harland wouldn't stop searching. The world wouldn't stop judging. And Ethan would have to decide whether what he felt for Clara was worth the storm that would surely follow. But tonight, wearing the scarf she'd made, watching her laugh at something in one of his books, he let himself believe in the possibility of happiness. Tomorrow would bring its troubles. Tonight, they were just 2 people who'd found each other in the vast loneliness of the frontier, building something fragile and precious from the ashes of their separate griefs. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Clara began to hum softly as she worked a sound of contentment that filled the empty corners of the house and made it, finally, feel like home. The trouble began with fresh wagon tracks in the snow. Ethan spotted them while checking the eastern boundary deep ruts cutting across his property where no one had permission to travel. He studied the marks with growing unease. 2 wagons, maybe 3, heading toward town but coming from the direction of the old mining road. Could be travelers, Clara said when he told her, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her coffee cup. Could be? He didn't believe it any more than she did. They'd grown complacent during the winter months, lulled by isolation and the cocoon of snow that separated them from the world. Now, with the March bringing the first hints of thaw, that world was creeping closer. The decision to go to town wasn't made lightly. They needed supplies, flour, salt, ammunition. But more than that, Ethan needed information. Who was asking questions? What strangers had been seen? "I should come with you," Clara said. "Absolutely not. Too risky." "And leaving me here alone isn't—" She crossed her arms. "What if those wagon tracks mean something? What if they come while you're gone?" He'd taught her to shoot, to ride, to read danger in the landscape. Now he had to trust those lessons. Keep the rifle close. Bar the doors. Anyone comes around you don't recognize. You fire a warning shot and ride for the Hendricks place. "I can take care of myself, Ethan." "I know you can." He touched her face gently. "That's not what worries me." The ride to Willow Creek took 4 hours through melting snow and mud. The town looked the same as always, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the vastness of the plain. But something felt different. Eyes followed him more closely. Conversation stopped when he passed. At Morrison's General Store, Hank Morrison greeted him with unusual formality. "Ethan, been a while. Winter keeps a man close to home." Ethan handed over his list. "How's business?" "Can't complain, though we've had some interesting visitors lately." Morrison's eyes flicked nervously toward the door. "Fellow came through last week, well-dressed, asking about ranch properties in the area. Said he was looking for investment opportunities." "That's so." Mentioned he was particularly interested in places that might be harboring strays. Morrison lowered his voice. "Had 2 men with him, rough-looking sorts. They've been staying at the hotel, buying drinks for anyone willing to talk." Ethan's blood chilled. "They ask about my place." "Not directly, but Ethan—" Morrison leaned closer. "There's a reward posted. $1,000 for information about a missing woman. Mentally disturbed. They say, dark hair, educated speech. Might be using the name Clara or Claire. $1,000. More than most men saw in 2 years. Enough to turn neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend." "I haven't seen anyone like that," Ethan said evenly. Morrison studied him. "Course not. Just thought you should know. Being out there alone and all. Wouldn't want you caught unaware if this poor sick woman showed up at your door." Ethan gathered his supplies, hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation. At the feed store, Tom Bradley mentioned the same strangers. At the blacksmith's, Joe Cooper warned him to be careful. "These aren't regular bounty hunters," Joe said quietly, pumping the bellows. "That fancy fellow, he's got authority behind him. Territorial papers, writs, the whole package. And those men with him—" He shook his head. "They've got killer's eyes." Ethan was loading his wagon when she appeared, Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, wife of the banker Clara had been meant to marry. She swept toward him in rustling silk, entirely out of place on the muddy street. "Oh, Mr. Calloway, a word." He tipped his hat warily. "Ma'am, I understand you've taken on help at your ranch, a woman. Don't see how that's anyone's business but mine." Her smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, but it is my business when that woman is promised to my brother-in-law, when she's stolen property belonging to one of the territory's most prominent families." "People aren't property, Mrs. Thornton." "Aren't they?" She stepped closer, voice dropping. "That girl is disturbed. Mr. Calloway, violent. She attacked her uncle, stole money and jewels. Who knows what lies she's told you, what danger you're in. Seems to me the only danger is from folks who can't mind their own affairs." Her eyes hardened. "Pride goes before a fall. Mr. Calloway, and you're standing on a very high cliff. That little ranch of yours, one word from my husband, and your loans could be called in. Your cattle contracts canceled. Your life could become very difficult." "Is that a threat?" "It's a kindness, a warning from one neighbor to another. She adjusted her gloves. The girl's uncle arrives tomorrow. He's prepared to be generous to anyone who helps recover his poor, sick niece. He's also prepared to be less generous to those who've hindered him. She swept away, leaving Ethan standing in the muddy street with his fists clenched. The town that had been his refuge, his community, suddenly felt hostile. Eyes watched from windows. Whispers followed his footsteps. At the hotel, he caught a glimpse of the men Morrison had described, two hulking figures in city clothes that fit them poorly, hands that hovered near concealed weapons. They watched him pass with predatory interest. Ethan drove out of town at a measured pace, fighting the urge to whip the horses into a gallop. Only when Willow Creek disappeared behind a rise did he give in to urgency, pushing the team hard through the treacherous mud. The sun was setting when he crested the final hill to see his ranch spread below. Smoke rose from the chimney. Clara was safe. But for how long? She met him at the door, rifle in hand, relief clear on her face. I was getting worried. Pack your things. Her face fell. They're coming. Tomorrow, maybe tonight. Your uncle's in town with hired guns. He unloaded supplies with quick efficiency. There's a reward, $1,000. Misses. Thornton cornered me, made threats. Clara sank into a chair. I'll leave now. Tonight, I won't let them destroy you for helping me. You're not going anywhere. Ethan knelt before her, taking her hands. We knew this was coming. Now we face it. Ethan, you don't understand. Uncle Jacob, he doesn't just defeat his enemies, he destroys them utterly. He'll take your ranch, your reputation, everything. Let him try. His voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. I've lost everything once already. Came back from that. But I won't lose you to a man who thinks money makes him God. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the night you touched my hand fixing that wagon wheel. Maybe before that. Maybe it became my fight the moment I chose to live like the walking dead for 5 years. He squeezed her hands. I'm done running from life. Clara, question is, are you... Tears tracked down her cheeks. What do we do? First, we make this place defensible. Then we send word to anyone who might stand with us. Joe Cooper gave me a knowing look. I think we might have more friends than your uncle expects. This is still the frontier. Folks out here don't take kindly to rich men throwing weight around. They worked through the night, preparing for siege. Ethan positioned rifles at strategic windows, filled buckets with water in case of fire, moved the horses to the small canyon behind the barn where they'd be harder to steal. Clara proved steady and capable, following his directions without question. Near dawn, exhausted, they sat together on the porch watching the eastern sky lighten. Whatever happens, Clara said quietly, I want you to know these months have been the happiest of my life. You gave me freedom. You gave me hope. You gave me... He kissed her, stopping words that might tempt fate. When they parted, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Save the speeches for after, he said roughly. We're going to win this. How can you be sure? Because we have something they don't. They're fighting for money and control. We're fighting for home. He stood, checking his rifle. Besides, I've got something Jacob Harlan doesn't. What's that? A partner who can shoot straight and balance ledgers. Man could conquer the world with advantages like those. Despite everything, she laughed. Ethan Calloway, you are impossible. So I've been told. Now come on, let's get ready to show your uncle what free people do when tyrants come calling. The sun rose full, painting the snow-patched plains gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Jacob Harlan and his men were coming, bringing money and law and civilized cruelty. But here on this small ranch, two people who'd found each other against all odds stood ready to fight for their right to choose their own lives. The waiting was almost over. The storm they'd both known was coming had finally arrived, but they would weather it together, or not at all. And in that unity, Ethan found, lay a strength greater than any army Jacob Harlan could muster. Clara checked her rifle one more time, then moved to stand beside him. "Partners?" she asked. "Partners," he confirmed, and together they watched the horizon, waiting for the dust clouds that would herald the battle for their future. The dust clouds appeared just after noon, 3 riders approaching from the east. Ethan watched them through his field glasses, noting their deliberate pace, the way they spread out as they neared the ranch. Behind them, a larger group followed 2 carriages and more mounted men. "He brought an army," Clara said quietly from beside him. "He brought witnesses," Ethan corrected. "Men like Harlan don't dirty their own hands. They make sure everything looks legal and proper." As the riders drew closer, Ethan recognized Sheriff Wade Morrison, among them Hank Morrison's brother, a man who'd always seemed decent enough, but who clearly knew which side his bread was buttered on. The realization stung. How many others in town had already chosen sides based on money rather than right? "Stay inside," Ethan told Clara. "Let me handle the talking." "No," her chin lifted. "I won't hide anymore. This is my fight." Before he could argue, the riders had reached the yard. Sheriff Morrison dismounted slowly, looking uncomfortable. "Ethan, Miss Bennett." He touched his hat brim. "I'm here on official business. Need you both to come peaceful-like." "On what grounds?" Ethan kept his rifle visible but not threatening. "Miss Bennett here is wanted for questioning regarding theft and assault. Her uncle's sworn out a complaint." "Her uncle's a liar." Morrison's jaw tightened. "That may be, but I've got papers, legal papers. She needs to come with me. Let the court sort it out." The carriages had arrived now. From the first stepped Jacob Harland himself, a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes that reminded Ethan of a rattlesnake. He was impeccably dressed despite the journey, every inch the successful gentleman. "Clara, my dear." His voice carried the false warmth of a politician. "You've led us quite a chase, but it's time to come home now. Time to get you the help you need." "I need no help from you," Clara said steadily. "I'm not sick, Uncle. I never was." "The delusions persist." "I see." Harlan turned to the sheriff. "As I told you, Sheriff Morrison, my niece suffers from nervous exhaustion and female hysteria. The death of her parents, followed by her unfortunate attachment to that criminal, it's all been too much for her delicate constitution." "Thomas wasn't a criminal," Clara spat. "You killed him, murdered him for the crime of caring about me." Harlan's expression grew mournful. "You see, she creates these fantasies, these paranoid delusions. It breaks my heart, but she needs constant care, professional care." From the second carriage emerged a thin man with pince-nez glasses and a medical bag. "I'm Dr. Elias Hartwell," he announced. "I've been treating Miss Harlan for her condition. I have documentation of her illness, her violent episodes, her flights from reality." "Bought and paid for documentation," Ethan said flatly. The doctor drew himself up. "Sir, I'll have you know I'm a respected alienist with degrees from—" "With debts to Jacob Harland," Clara interrupted. "Tell them, doctor, tell them how much my uncle pays you to keep his inconvenient relatives docile." "The patient often turns against those trying to help her," the doctor said smoothly. "It's quite common in cases of acute hysteria." More people were emerging from the carriages, now well-dressed townspeople, including Adelaide Thornton and her banker husband. Several other prominent citizens. Harland had indeed brought witnesses. Mr. Calloway." Harland addressed Ethan directly for the first time. "You seem like a reasonable man. I'm sure you thought you were being charitable, taking in a distressed woman. But surely you can see now that Clara needs more help than you can provide. I'm prepared to compensate you for your trouble. Say, $500 for your time and inconvenience." "Not interested." $1,000 then. Surely your hospitality hasn't been entirely selfless." Harlan's eyes flicked between them. Insinuation clear. A young woman, alone with a bachelor for months, People might draw unfortunate conclusions, conclusions that could damage reputations, make it difficult for a man to do business in these parts. The only reputation getting damaged here is yours, Ethan said evenly. Man who'd lock up his own kin to steal her inheritance. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Harlan's face darkened. Inheritance, Adelaide Thornton laughed shrilly. The girl has no inheritance. Her father died penniless, leaving nothing but debts. That's a lie. Clara stepped forward. Father left me his share of grandfather's estate, the Rochester properties. The investments, worth nearly $50,000. Money that would have been mine on my 25th birthday or upon marriage to a man of my choosing. Tell them, Uncle Jacob. Tell them why you really needed me to marry Wallace Thornton. The ravings of a disturbed mind, Harlan said. But Ethan noticed several of the witnesses exchanging glances. I have proof. Clara's voice rang clear. Letters from Father's attorney. Documents I hid before you locked me away. Documents that show how you've been stealing from my trust, using my money to prop up your failing cattle empire. Enough. Harlan's composure cracked. Sheriff, do your duty. Arrest this woman. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Now, Mr. Harlan, she ain't technically under arrest. We're just bringing her in for questioning. I have a writ. Harlan produced a document, signed by Judge Thornton in Billings, declaring her mentally incompetent and placing her in my custody. Judge Thornton, Ethan said loudly. Would that be Wallace Thornton's cousin? How convenient. More murmurs from the crowd. The tide wasn't turning yet, but it was beginning to shift. This is ridiculous, Doctor, Hartwell declared. The girl is clearly delusional. Mr. Calloway has obviously fallen under her spell. It happens unstable women can be quite manipulative. Watch your tongue, Doctor, Ethan warned. Or what you'll shoot me violence to defend your... What is she exactly? Mr. Calloway, your housekeeper, your woman. The doctor's smile was nasty. Sheriff, I suggest you search the house. Who knows what evidence of impropriety you might find. That was too much. Ethan stepped off the porch, rifle still in hand but pointed down. Any man sets foot in my house without cause, I'll consider it trespassing. Sheriff, you know me, known me for years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my word? Morrison looked miserable. No, Ethan, you haven't. Then hear me now. Clara Bennett came to my ranch seeking honest work. I gave it to her. She's proven herself capable, intelligent, and saner than most folks I know. Whatever papers Harlan's waving, whatever lies his paid doctor spouts, I'm telling you, that woman is no more crazy than I am. That's not for you to decide, Morrison stammered. Isn't it? A new voice called out. Joseph Cooper, the blacksmith, pushed through the crowd on horseback, followed by Tom Bradley from the feed store and, surprisingly, Hank Morrison. Seems to me a man ought to have say in who stays on his own property. This doesn't concern you, Harlan snapped. Concerns all of us when rich folks start using the law like a club. Joe replied, I done some asking around. Mr. Harlan, folks in Billings got interesting stories about you. About a young man named Thomas Brennan, who died real convenient-like. About other relatives who've had nervous troubles when they didn't fall in line. Hearsay and gossip, Harlan declared, but his confidence was wavering. Maybe so. Tom Bradley spoke up. But Miss Clara's been in town several times these past months. Any of us could see she's clear-headed. Helped my wife with figures when she was struggling with the store accounts. That don't sound like a crazy woman to me. I can speak for myself, Clara said suddenly, stepping fully into the open. Sheriff Morrison, you want to question me here, in front of these witnesses. Ask me anything. Test my mind however you like. If I'm truly as disturbed as my uncle claims, it should be obvious to everyone. It was a bold move. Morrison looked to Harlan, who nodded curtly. All right, miss, tell us your full name. Clara Marie Bennett. I was born June 15th, 1862, in Rochester, New York. My parents were James Bennett and Marie Delacroix Bennett. And why did you leave your uncle's home? Clara straightened her shoulders. Because he held me prisoner. Because he tried to force me into marriage to steal my inheritance. Because when I refused, he had me declared insane and locked in my room for 14 months. I left because I wanted to live free, to make my own choices, to be treated as a human being rather than property. She attacked me, Harland interrupted. Struck me with a poker. Stole money. I defended myself when you tried to force laudanum down my throat. Clara shot back. And I took only what was mine money from my own account that you'd been managing for my own good. The crowd was definitely shifting now. Several women in particular were whispering among themselves, looking at Harland with new suspicion. Dr. Hartwell tried one more time. This is all part of her delusion. She's created an elaborate fantasy to justify her actions. Then test me, Clara challenged. Ask me mathematics, geography, history. Read me legal documents and see if I understand them. Give me any test of mental competency you choose. Doctor, unless you're afraid of what you'll find. The doctor's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Ethan felt a surge of pride at Clara's courage. This is preposterous, Harland exploded. Sheriff, I demand you execute that writ immediately. But Morrison was looking uncertain now, glancing between the crowd of townspeople and Harland's increasingly red face. Mr. Harland, the sheriff said slowly. Maybe it would be best if we handled this back in town. Let the territorial judge review everything proper-like. Miss Bennett can come voluntary. Stay at the hotel with the matron to watch her. No. Harland's control finally snapped completely. I've wasted enough time and money on this ungrateful girl. Jenkins Coulter, take her. The two hired guns who'd been sitting silent on their horses suddenly dismounted, hands moving toward their weapons, but they'd miscalculated. This wasn't some back alley in Billings. This was Ethan's land, surrounded by his neighbors. I wouldn't, Joe Cooper said quietly, his own hand resting on his pistol. Tom Bradley and several other men had also shifted positions, ready to back Ethan's play. You drawn law officers, one of the gunmen sneered. Don't see no badges, Joe replied. Just hired thugs trying to kidnap a woman. Sheriff Morrison finally found his backbone. Stand down, everyone. Nobody's taking anybody by force. Miss Bennett, will you come to town voluntarily? I promise you'll be safe. And we'll get this sorted proper. Clara looked at Ethan, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. In town, with witnesses, she'd be safer than in a running fight here. I'll come, she said, but only if Mr. Calloway can accompany me. And I want a public hearing, not some backroom deal. That's fair. Morrison agreed, clearly relieved to avoid bloodshed. This is outrageous, Harland sputtered. I have legal papers. And Miss Bennett will have a chance to contest them, the sheriff said firmly. That's how law works out here, Mr. Harland, even for rich folks. The tension slowly eased, though everyone remained watchful. As Clara gathered a few belongings, she pressed the hidden documents into Ethan's hands. Keep these safe, she whispered. They're the only real proof I have. We're going to win this, he assured her. Together. Together. As the strange procession headed toward town, Clara in the sheriff's custody but not bound, Ethan riding alongside, the townspeople forming an unofficial escort, and Harland fuming in his carriage, Ethan allowed himself a moment of hope. The battle wasn't won yet. Harland still had money, influence, and legal documents on his side, but Clara had something more powerful, the truth, the courage to speak it, and a community beginning to see through the lies. The final confrontation was coming. But for the first time since those wagon tracks appeared in the snow, Ethan believed they might actually prevail. Justice might be blind, but sometimes, with enough people watching, she could still find her way to the truth. The hearing was set for the next morning, but Jacob Harland didn't wait for legal proceedings. That night, as Ethan kept watch outside the hotel where Clara was being held, he spotted movement in the shadows. Harland's hired guns, Jenkins and Coulter, creeping toward the back entrance. Ethan moved swiftly, intercepting them in the alley. "Lost, gentlemen?" Jenkins, the larger of the two, sneered. "Just checking on the boss's property." "Funny thing about property," Ethan said evenly. "It doesn't usually need checking on at midnight through back doors." "Walk away, rancher," Coulter warned, hand hovering near his gun. "This ain't your concern." "That's where you're wrong." The tension stretched taut. Then Jenkins made his move, going for his weapon. Ethan was faster, his months of solitary practice paying off. His fist connected with Jenkins's jaw before the gun cleared leather, sending the man sprawling. Coulter reached for his own weapon, but froze as Joe Cooper emerged from the shadows, rifle trained steady. "Evening, boys," Joe said pleasantly. "Nice night for a walk. Shame if it ended with blood on the ground." Sheriff Morrison appeared then, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, his hired guns caught red-handed. Ethan and Joe standing firm. "What's going on here?" "These men were attempting to break into the hotel," Ethan reported, "likely to kidnap Miss Bennett." "That's a lie," Jenkins spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "We were just what?" Morrison's voice hardened. "Mr. Harland assured me his men would cause no trouble. Seems he lied." "You're making a mistake, Sheriff," Coulter warned. "Mr. Harland has powerful friends." "And I've got a sworn duty," Morrison replied. "You two can spend the night in jail. We'll sort this out come morning." As the gunmen were led away, Morrison paused beside Ethan. "I'm trying to do right here, Ethan, but Harland's got influence I can't just ignore." "I know. Wade, just keep her safe till morning. That's all I ask." The sheriff nodded wearily. "Tom Bradley and some others are taking shifts watching the hotel. She'll be protected." Dawn came slowly, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. The whole town seemed to gather for the hearing, packing into the makeshift courtroom above the general store. Clara sat straight-backed beside Ethan, wearing her best dress, hair pinned severely. She looked every inch the educated lady, not the madwoman Harland painted her to be. Judge William Carver, the circuit judge who happened to be in town, presided. He was an older man with keen eyes and a reputation for fairness, a stroke of luck, as he had no connections to Harland's money. "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Carver announced, "to determine the validity of this guardianship writ and whether Miss Bennett requires supervision." Harland's lawyer, a slick man from Billings named Josiah Pratt, stood first. "Your Honor, we have clear documentation of Miss Bennett's mental instability. Dr. Hartwell's medical opinion, sworn statements from household staff, and the guardianship order from Judge Thornton." "I'd like to examine these documents," Judge Carver said, as Pratt presented his case, painting Clara as delusional and violent. Ethan watched the crowd. Many looked skeptical, especially the women. They'd seen Clara in town, witnessed her competence firsthand. When Pratt finished, Judge Carver turned to Clara. "Miss Bennett, do you have representation?" "I'll speak for myself, Your Honor." Clara stood, hands clasped to hide their trembling. "I'm accused of being mentally incompetent. Who better to refute that than myself?" "Irregular," Pratt objected. "If she's incompetent, that's what we're here to determine." The judge cut him off. "Proceed, Miss Bennett." Clara began simply, stating facts, her education, her father's death, her inheritance. Then she produced the documents Ethan had kept, safe letters from her father's attorney confirming the estate, bank records showing Harland's withdrawals from her trust. "These are forgeries," Harland burst out. "Then you won't mind if we telegraph Mr. Whitman in Rochester to confirm their authenticity. Clara challenged. The judge studied the papers. These appear genuine. Continue, Miss Bennett. Clara described her imprisonment with clinical precision, the locked doors, the forced medications, the isolation. Several women in the crowd gasped when she mentioned being drugged. Doctor, Hartwell prescribed laudanum for my hysteria, Clara said. When I refused, they held me down and forced it. Is that medical treatment or assault? Your Honor. The patient was violent. Doctor, Hartwell protested. It was necessary. Was I violent before you tried to drug me, doctor, or did I become violent in self-defense? The doctor had no good answer. Clara then called witnesses. Tom Bradley testified about her help with his accounts. Mrs. Cooper described Clara teaching her daughter to read. Even Hank Morrison admitted she'd seemed perfectly sane during her visits to his store. But the most important witness, Clara said, is Mr. Ethan Calloway. Ethan took the stand, aware of every eye upon him. Mr. Calloway, Clara began. You've employed me these past months. In your opinion, am I mentally competent? More competent than most. Ethan said firmly. You've managed my books, helped with ranch work, shown intelligence and capability in everything you've undertaken. And have I shown signs of hysteria, violence, delusion? Only signs I've seen are courage and determination. You've faced hard work without complaint, danger without panic. If that's madness, we could use more of it. Pratt rose for cross-examination. Mr. Calloway, what exactly is your relationship with Miss Bennett? She's my employee. Nothing more. A young woman, living in your house for months. Ethan met the lawyer's insinuating gaze steadily. Miss Bennett has conducted herself with complete propriety. Any suggestion otherwise is an insult to her character and mine. Yet you defend her so fiercely. One might wonder, Ethan interrupted, why a man needs to lock up his own niece to steal her money. One might wonder why hired guns try to break into hotels at midnight. One might wonder a lot of things. Mr. Pratt. A ripple of agreement went through the crowd. Harland couldn't contain himself any longer. He surged to his feet. This is ridiculous. I've spent thousands tracking this ungrateful girl, trying to help her. Help her to Wallace Thornton's bed, someone called out. Help her out of her inheritance, another voice added. Order. Judge Carver banged his gavel. Mr. Harland, you'll have your chance to speak. When Harland took the stand, his composure was cracking. Under Clara's gentle but persistent questioning, contradictions emerged. He claimed she'd attacked him unprovoked, but couldn't explain why he'd had laudanum ready. He insisted her inheritance was a delusion, but couldn't produce documentation proving otherwise. Mr. Harland, Clara asked finally, if I'm truly insane, why did you try to arrange my marriage? Surely you wouldn't wed your business partner's brother to a madwoman. Harland's face went purple. You were better then. The marriage would have stabilized. Stabilized your finances. You mean, how dare you? Your Honor. Clara addressed the judge. I request that Mr. Harland's financial records be examined. I believe they'll show he's been using my inheritance to cover his own debts. That's private business, Harland exploded. As is my mind, Uncle, yet you've made that public. The judge looked thoughtful. Mr. Harland, if you have nothing to hide, what happened next happened fast. Harland, seeing everything slipping away, completely lost control. You stupid girl, I gave you everything. A home, position, protection. All you had to do was marry Thornton and be grateful. But no, you had to ruin it all for that stable boy. That nobody. He lunged at Clara. Ethan moved to intercept him, but Clara was faster. The months of ranch work had strengthened her, given her confidence in her own body. She sidestepped Harland's charge and pushed him off balance. He crashed into the witness chair, sprawling ungracefully. You see, Clara said calmly to the stunned courtroom. Who's showing violence and instability now? Jenkins and Coulter, still in custody, chose that moment to make their own desperate play. They broke free from the deputy guarding them, going for weapons. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Ethan shoved Clara behind him as Jenkins pulled a hidden derringer. The shot went wide, shattering a window. Women screamed. Men dove for cover. But the good people of Willow Creek were frontier stock. Joe Cooper tackled Coulter. Tom Bradley and others subdued Jenkins. And Clara stood tall in the midst of chaos, every inch the woman who'd survived imprisonment and pursued freedom across hostile territory. When order was restored, both gunmen were bloodied and chained. Harlan sat slumped in his chair, all pretense of righteousness gone. Judge Carver's gavel rang out like rifle shots. I've seen enough, Miss Bennett. It's clear to me that you're of sound mind and strong character. The guardianship is dissolved. You're free to go where you will. But the money, Harlan started weakly, will be investigated by proper authorities. The judge continued. Sheriff Morrison, I'm placing Mr. Harlan under arrest pending investigation for fraud, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. You can't, Harlan raged. I have connections, I'll ruin you all. Uncle? Clara said quietly, and something in her voice made him stop. It's over. Thomas is dead because of your greed. I nearly lost myself, but I survived. I found freedom, and friends, and... She glanced at Ethan. And more. Your money, your power, they mean nothing here. These people judge by character, not bank accounts. You'll regret this, Harlan hissed as he was led away. All of you. No, Clara said firmly. The only regret is that it took me so long to fight back. As the courtroom cleared, townspeople surrounded Clara with congratulations. Women who'd stood silent now spoke of their own struggles with controlling men. Men who'd feared Harlan's influence shook Ethan's hand, admiring his courage. You did it, Ethan told Clara when they finally had a moment alone. We did it, she corrected. I couldn't have stood up there without knowing you were beside me. Sheriff Morrison approached, hat in hand. Miss Bennett, Mr. Calloway, I owe you both an apology. I should have seen through Harlan sooner. You did your duty as you saw it, Clara said graciously. That's all anyone can ask. As they prepared to leave town, Dr. Hartwell made one last attempt. This isn't over. When Mr. Harlan's lawyers... Doctor, Clara interrupted. I'd worry more about your own situation. Fraudulent medical testimony is a serious crime, as is administering drugs against a patient's will. The doctor paled and slunk away. On the ride back to the ranch, Clara was quiet. The weight of what had happened, the violence, the revelations, the narrow escape was settling in. It's strange, she said finally. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I just feel tired. Freedom's exhausting, Ethan agreed. Being responsible for your own life, making your own choices, it's harder than letting others control you. Is that why you hid out here for 5 years to avoid those choices? He considered. Maybe, but that's done now. Can't hide from life when it's sitting in your kitchen, teaching you proper bookkeeping. Clara smiled then, the first real smile since the ordeal began. So what now? I'm free to go anywhere, be anyone. That's true. But I'm hoping you might choose to stay, not as my employee, as my partner in everything. Clara looked at him, this man who'd stood against power and privilege for her sake, who'd risked everything he'd built for a stranger's freedom. Ethan Calloway, she said softly. Are you proposing? Badly, apparently. I had a better speech planned, but after today... She stopped him with a kiss, there on the prairie with the sun setting behind them. When they parted, both were breathless. Yes, she said simply. To partnership, to staying, to whatever comes next. even if Harland makes good on his threats. Especially then. Her eyes sparked with the fire he'd first seen that night by her broken wagon. I've spent too long running from fights. Time to build something worth defending. They rode home together as the stars emerged. Two people who'd found each other in the vast loneliness of the frontier. Behind them lay violence and fear. Ahead waited uncertain challenges. But tonight, they were free. Tonight, they were together. And in the wild heart of Montana territory. That was victory enough. Spring came slowly to Montana that year, the snow reluctantly giving way to mud and the first brave shoots of green grass. Ethan's recovery was equally gradual, each day bringing small victories, sitting up without help, taking a few steps across the room, finally making it to the porch to watch the sunrise. Clara never left his side during those first critical weeks. She proved herself as capable a nurse as she was a rancher, changing bandages with steady hands, brewing willow bark tea for the pain, reading to him during the long afternoons when rest came hard. "You saved my life," Ethan said one morning, watching her work at the stove. "You saved mine first," she replied without turning. Seemed only fair to return the favor. The wound from Coulter's bullet had been severe, tearing through muscle and grazing bone. Dr. Samuel Hendricks, summoned from the neighboring ranch, had worked through the night to stop the bleeding and clean the wound. "You're lucky," the doctor had said. "An inch lower and we'd be having a different conversation." Lucky. Ethan supposed he was, though lying in bed, weak as a newborn calf. It didn't always feel that way. But then Clara would smile at him over her shoulder, or bring him coffee just the way he liked it, and he understood that luck came in many forms. The community rallied around them in ways that surprised and humbled them both. Joe Cooper and Tom Bradley organized work parties to handle the ranch chores Ethan couldn't manage. Women from town brought food, supplies, and most importantly, friendship for Clara, who'd been isolated for so long. "Never knew I had so many neighbors," Ethan marveled one day, watching through the window as half a dozen men repaired winter damage to the barn. "You always had them," Clara said, adjusting his pillows. "You just never let them close enough to help." It was true. In his grief and self-imposed exile, he'd forgotten the fundamental truth of frontier life: people survived by depending on each other. News came sporadically from the outside world. Jacob Harland had been transferred to the territorial prison pending trial. His financial empire had crumbled under investigation, revealing years of fraud and embezzlement. Many of his victims were small ranchers and homesteaders he'd driven into bankruptcy. "They're saying he might get 20 years, Sheriff Morrison reported during one visit. His lawyers trying to claim mental instability, ironic, considering... Clara received the news quietly. Despite everything, Harland was still her blood, and his downfall brought no joy, only a sense of waste. The legal matters of her inheritance proved complex, but ultimately favorable. A legitimate lawyer from Denver helped recover most of what Harland had stolen, though some was lost forever in his failed schemes. "It's enough," Clara said when the final accounting came through. "More than enough to secure our future." Our future. The words warmed Ethan more than any medicine. As his strength returned, they began making plans. The wedding would be simple, a gathering of friends at the ranch, nothing like the society affair Harland had envisioned for her. They would use some of Clara's recovered funds to expand the ranch, buy better breeding stock, perhaps even hire steady hands so they wouldn't face every challenge alone. "I want to build a school," Clara announced one evening. "Nothing fancy, just a single room where local children can learn to read and write properly. You'd teach..." "Who else? I have the education, and now I have the freedom to use it." Her eyes lit with purpose. "Every child should have the chance to learn, to think for themselves. It's the best defense against men like my uncle." Ethan reached for her hand. "Your parents would be proud." "I hope so. I spent so long being angry at them for dying, for leaving me vulnerable. But now I understand they gave me the tools I needed: education, music, the memory of real love. The rest, I had to learn myself. The wedding day dawned clear and warm. The first truly perfect day of spring. The cottonwood tree in the yard had burst into full leaf, providing shade for the guests who'd traveled from miles around. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit and carefully preserved through all her travels. Ethan stood waiting in his best suit, still moving carefully but standing straight and proud. Reverend Patterson from Willow Creek performed the ceremony, his words simple but heartfelt. When he asked if anyone objected, Joe Cooper called out, "Only objection is it took them so long," which earned laughter from the assembled crowd. As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands bought with money honestly earned, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them here, a midnight meeting on a lonely road, hands touching over a broken wagon wheel, two damaged souls recognizing something in each other that promised healing. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before friends who'd stood by them through violence and trial. As they parted, Clara whispered, "No more running." "No more hiding," he agreed. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors. Tom Bradley played fiddle while couples danced on the packed earth of the yard. Children ran between the adults' legs, their laughter bright as bird song. Mrs. Morrison pulled Clara aside at one point. "I owe you an apology. Dear, when you first came to town, I listened to gossip, made judgments. I was wrong. We all make mistakes," Clara said graciously. "What matters is learning from them." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan found himself on the porch with Sheriff Morrison. "Hell of a thing," the sheriff said, gesturing at the celebration. "Year ago, you were alone out here, barely talking to anyone. Now look at this." "Year ago, I was just existing," Ethan corrected. "Clara taught me the difference between surviving and living. She's good for you. You're good for her, too. Some folks just fit together like that." As if summoned by their words, Clara appeared, slipping her hand into Ethan's. "People are starting to leave. Should we see them off?" Together, they thanked their guests, accepting good wishes and promises of help with the autumn harvest. Finally, as the last wagon disappeared into the dusk, they stood alone in their yard. "How's the pain?" Clara asked, noting the way he favored his injured side. "Worth it," he said firmly. "Every second of it was worth getting to this moment." She leaned against him carefully, mindful of his healing wound. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if my wagon hadn't broken down on your land?" "Every day, and every day I thank whatever force in the universe put you in my path." They went inside, to the home that truly felt like home, now filled with Clara's books and music, with evidence of two lives intertwining. On the mantel sat two photographs, Sarah and Emma in their silver frame, and a new image of Ethan and Clara on their wedding day. "They would have liked you," Ethan said, seeing Clara's gaze linger on the older photograph. "I hope so. I'm grateful to them. In a way, they taught you how to love. I'm just blessed to be the one who reminded you." That night, as they lay together as husband and wife, Clara traced the scar where Coulter's bullet had torn through him. "No regrets?" she asked. "Only one," he said, catching her hand. "I wish we'd had more time. 5 years I wasted wallowing in grief." "No." She rose on one elbow to look at him. "Those years made you who you are, and I needed that time too, to find my strength, to understand what real love looked like. We met when we were ready, not before." Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, not a threat now, just part of the wild symphony of their chosen home. The sound that had once seemed lonely now felt like freedom itself. In the months that followed, they built the life they'd dreamed of during those uncertain winter days. Clara's school opened with 8 students, their ages ranging from 6 to 14. She taught with patience and joy, inspiring in her students the same love of learning that had sustained her through captivity. Ethan's strength returned fully, and with hired hands to help, the ranch prospered. They added to the house a proper study for Clara, a larger kitchen, eventually a nursery when Clara announced she was with child. "Are you afraid?" she asked him the night she told him, both of them remembering his earlier losses. "Terrified," he admitted. "But that's what love is, isn't it, being terrified and choosing to hope anyway?" Their daughter was born as the cottonwoods turned gold, a healthy baby with Clara's dark eyes and Ethan's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah Marie, honoring both past and present, the love that was lost and the love that was found. As Ethan held his daughter for the first time, Clara weak but smiling in their bed, he thought about the mysterious ways of providence, how a broken wagon wheel could lead to a mended life, how helping a stranger could restore a man's faith in humanity, how love could grow from the ashes of old grief, stronger for having been tested. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, watching him cradle their child. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that every hard thing we went through was worth it to get to this moment. Every lonely night, every moment of fear, every battle we fought, it all led here." "To home," Clara agreed. "To home," he echoed, and in that simple word lay all the truth they needed. The ranch stood strong against the vastness of the Montana sky, no longer a refuge from life, but a celebration of it. In the years to come, it would shelter not just Ethan and Clara and their children, but all those who needed to be reminded that love could triumph over greed, that courage could defeat oppression, and that sometimes, just sometimes, broken things could be made whole again. They had built more than a home. They had built a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, and hope over despair. And in the wild, untamed heart of the West, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Clara and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a thumbs up and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Until next time, partners.